All right, so this is very exciting. Just so you begin to understand the power of the Glimpse conference, and this is true. During the coffee break, Facebook added hashtags. That is something that actually happened. You can now go on Facebook and add a hashtag. You have to assume they were watching what was happening on Twitter with the Glimpse conference and said, we have got to get on top of this. So that's amazing. We're going to move on to our next panel. Neighborhood discovery. I think this is particularly interesting given that earlier today we just had 4 smart investors say you can't build a business on location. I wonder what these guys are going to have to say about that. So, moderated by David Weir, technology blogger at 7x7. Coming up onto the stage, we have Ann Montgomery, product manager at Airbnb, former co-founder of Nabewise. Paul Davison, founder and CEO of Highlight. Sarah Leary, co-founder and VP of marketing at Nextdoor. And Rishi Mandal, co-founder and CEO of Sōsh. Please welcome them to the stage.
All right, well, welcome to all of you, and we're here about neighborhood discovery. I'm going to launch some very broad sort of questions to these guys. Of course, it's about discovering, it's about sharing. We've been finding out lately that we're sharing all of our metadata with the NSA, so, you know, it's a good time to talk about these kinds of topics. But I thought we could start out just by asking each of you to talk a little bit about what you view as social discovery and neighborhoods. These are concepts. I mean, what is a neighborhood? What is social discovery from your point of view and through your businesses? And just, why don't we start with Ann?
All right. Hi, I'm Ann Montgomery. I'm a product manager at Airbnb, and I lead our Neighborhoods initiative. Airbnb is a community marketplace where you can list and book unique spaces around the world. We're in 192 countries and thousands of neighborhoods. And I think, like all the panelists here today, we're bridging the online and offline worlds in a really interesting way. I think one of the unique things about what we're doing with neighborhood discovery is we're helping non-locals understand neighborhoods. So how do you help a traveler feel like a local? Interestingly, there are about 72% of our listings in San Francisco fall outside of the hotel corridor. And on top of that, when we ask our users what matters to them when finding a listing, neighborhoods is always their #1 criteria. And so because of that, we built Airbnb Neighborhoods this past November, and it helps people match to different neighborhoods across criteria like trendy, great nightlife, good dining, great public transportation. And then once somebody has matched to different neighborhoods, we're focused on helping them understand the essence of the neighborhood's brand, through really immersive photography, and then heavily curated crowdsourced content. So that's some of what we're doing.
Thanks, Paul.
So I have a startup called Highlight that helps you learn more about the people around you. And the way we think about it is if you look at the way the physical world works right now, we live in these cities full of strangers, right? We walk around, we stand in line next to each other, we sit on the bus next to each other, we go to bars and meetups to meet each other, and we sit in rooms like this and we look around and we don't know a single thing about anyone around us. And that is really, really weird. I mean, you have to think about it for a minute because it doesn't seem really weird at first.
But the NSA does know everything about everybody in here. That's even weirder.
No, I mean, it's really strange. It's not how we like to live. It's not how we're wired. If you look at what's happened on the web over the last 15 years, it's so clear. We love to share. We love to talk about ourselves. We're obsessed with learning about other people. But in the physical world, we just walk around not knowing anything about anyone. But all of a sudden...
So what does Highlight do about this problem?
So the way it basically works is that if you install the app and you're standing near me, your profile will show up on my phone. So I can see your photo, so I know it's you. I can see your full name and where you work and all the friends we have in common and all the other stuff we have in common. And if I'm walking down the street with my phone in my pocket and it sees someone interesting nearby, it'll tell me. So it might say, your friend's at that cafe right there, or that girl knows 17 of your friends. And
how soon can we have an aura above our head with just all this information?
I mean, it sounds totally crazy, but I think that stuff is coming, right? It's a number of years out, but our goal, we really think of it like a sixth sense, where I can stand in this room and I can look at someone 30 feet away that I've never seen before in my life and just know all about them. And I can sense when my friends are on the other side of a wall and walk around a foreign city when I'm lost and look out in the crowd and know that that couple speaks English so I can go ask them where my hotel is. I mean, you've got a billion plus people walking around with these insanely powerful sensors in their pockets that know all about them and who their friends are and what places are nearby and what devices are nearby. And they have a GPS and gyroscope and accelerometer and proximity sensors and microphones. And And there, you know, the last thing I'd say is like our grandchildren will think it's so ridiculous that we would walk around a city, we'd see someone that we know on the other side of the street, and we would forget their name, and there was literally no way for us to get that data. And so we would just avoid eye contact and pretend we hadn't seen them. I mean,
My grandchildren already think I'm that way.
We just walk around blind and dumb, and we have the technology to do better now. And so that's what we want to build, that sort of sixth sense that helps you know about the people around you.
Fabulous. Sarah?
So I'm co-founder of Nextdoor.com. That's a private social network for the neighborhood, and we are all about connecting you with your neighbors. As probably most of you know, the neighborhood is actually the original social network. It has existed for centuries in the real world. Unfortunately, over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, there's been a general decline in people's involvement in their local community, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are technology-based, but a lot of them have to do with both families, both parents are outside the home, and just we're not sitting on the front porch. We saw this, and we also saw what was happening with Facebook, and we're connecting with friends and family around the globe. We had Twitter to follow people and topics. We had LinkedIn to keep track of our professional networks, but we had no way to get to know the people who lived right down the street. And most people, most Americans actually don't know their neighbors. In fact, 28% of Americans don't know a single neighbor by name. And so we're trying to use technology as a way to help break the ice and help bring back that sense of community, because we know there's all these great tangible benefits of knowing your neighbors, looking out for each other, keeping the community safe. And so for us, it's all about helping you bridge the gap of connecting with people with whom you share a local community, but you don't know otherwise, and making it easy to connect online such that you can get together with each other offline over time.
Thank you. Rishi.
Hi guys, I'm Rishi. I have a startup called Sōsh, and what Sōsh does is it helps you find cool things to do in your city. I was thinking about neighborhood discovery kind of as a term, and I was realizing it really is just sort of a means to an end, at least for all the companies up here. You know, for Airbnb, it's discovering a new city. For Highlight, it's meeting new people. For Nextdoor, it's building community. And for Sōsh, it's having memorable experiences, you know, and I think really when you go back and look at your life, it's a collection of people you've shared a lot of experiences with, moments in time where, you know, people will say, remember that time when, you know, we did something crazy or we did something fun. And I think the real tragedy in this day and age is, you know, people do the same things over and over, and that doesn't really make sense in a place like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and, you know, even really Palo Alto or any, like, you know, bustling sort of suburb. And so we think it's silly that Transformers 3 has like $150 million opening weekend because people go to the movies every single weekend. They don't know what else to do. And so what Sōsh is trying to do is take, you know, all of those sensors you were talking about and all those people who are circling around that we were talking about, and start to make sense of who's like you, what do they like, you know, what do they know about places, and you know, not just pins on maps, but a look inside of those, and start to give color to folks in a way that is pretty human. You know, we use photos and writing to really communicate, you know, what's happening around you, what should you check out, and obviously discovery is a part of this conversation. So we try to tailor that to the person, to their preferences, to the day of the week and the weather outside and who they're hanging out with, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what Sōsh is all about, and that's how I think about neighborhood discovery kind of tying in.
Interesting. Now, when I listen to you guys, a thought occurs to me, and it's this. Are we living our lives so virtually now that we really don't meet one another any longer, and we need services like yours just to meet each other? I know it's a dumb question.
There's a lot I could say about that. I think that, so first of all, the reason why it's hard to effectively meet people, whether that's making friends when you move to a new city by yourself or finding the one right person to marry out of the billions you might consider, or knowing which two people to talk to here, it's because we have no data. I mean, imagine if the web were like the real world. LinkedIn would be a collection of 230 million profiles, and every profile would be a blank page with a photo and a message button. There'd be no names, no words, no links, nothing. And if you wanted to find an iOS engineer, you just randomly message profiles and say, excuse me, ma'am, is there any chance you're an iOS engineer? Nope. Okay, you make quilts. Okay, I'm sorry to bother you. Pardon me, sir. I mean, it's ridiculous, and that's the way the real world is. And we can do better than that. The other thing I would say is that when people talk about Highlight, they often say, oh, it's about meeting people. We actually never talk about meeting people when we talk about the product. I mean, when those moments happen, they can be some of the most special moments on the surface, but it's really more about surfacing that metadata and helping you see things that you've never been able to see before. And it's hard for us to understand why we need that or want that, but here's how I think about it. I mean, imagine if your entire life, everywhere you went, everyone you ever saw just looked like a gray dot, and they all sounded the same. Everyone in this room just looked like a gray dot, and you could look around a room and you wouldn't know that that's a 2-year-old boy and that's an 87-year-old woman and that's your best friend. And it didn't even occur to you that that was strange because nothing else had ever been possible, right? And then one day somebody flipped a switch and the world turned into what it is today, where you can look around this room and see people's age and gender and hair color and what they dress like and sound like and how they carry themselves and all these little details that inform how you recognize people and remember people and make sense of the world and navigate your day. And it's like suddenly everything just turned to color. I mean, I think the transformation that the world is about to undergo, thanks to our cell phones and the technology surrounding that, is a change of potentially a bigger order of magnitude, where I can look at someone 30 feet away that I've never seen before in my life and know their background and their name and hopes and dreams and everything we have in common and all the times I've been near them, and I can sense things about all the people around me. And most of the time I'm not going to meet people. It's about being able to see more and have this new sense that we've never had before. And
So I get it. Lots of data, lots of data. You're all sitting on a ton of data and surfacing a ton of data, and you face choices what data to expose and how to use that data. What are the social norms that are emerging, and how are those getting set for this world of big data that is about all of us? I was mentioning that and sort of joking, but I mean, we have some pretty big questions about all of this data and privacy, and you all are trying to find ways to harvest that data in ways that really help people, I think, sincerely, and I want to get to that. But what are the social norms? How do they emerge? Who sets them? What are you seeing so far?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm so inspired by what Paul's talking about, because on Airbnb, you can go and you can stay in a stranger's home. So you can go to a completely unfamiliar city, stay in a completely unfamiliar neighborhood, and then actually sleep in the home of someone who's a complete stranger. And that's really powerful. So how do we actually make people feel comfortable doing something that's totally new in some sense? And so I think the way that we think about it at Airbnb, it's about telling the story and setting guest expectations. So we tell the story of the host, we tell the story of the listing through beautiful immersive photography, and then you can see all the guests who've stayed there before will provide their reviews and their ratings. And then now it's about telling the story of the neighborhood as well, so that you know the kind of place that you're actually going to be experiencing. And I think the second thing that you're highlighting there, which is really interesting, is this challenge of data. So there are so many startups out there, I think, that are thinking about this question, and maybe they're building a new product, a new experience, and they're thinking, if I can just get, great data or great user-generated content, we'll be set. And what's so interesting about Airbnb is we have this really interesting tension between the amount of data that we actually have and the amount of data that's helpful to people. And so we have this really passionate host community. They're so passionate. They'll tell you, we get the longest emails about neighborhoods and them sharing with us about what their neighborhood is like. But what's actually useful to the end user is a very heavily curated, and I think Sōsh and a lot of us are thinking so much about this curation thing, a very heavily curated amount of information that will actually help people feel the confidence to go into an unfamiliar neighborhood. So to give you an example, if we provide people with a long list of restaurants and establishments in a neighborhood, they'll actually feel like an outsider, and they'll feel less confident to go into this unfamiliar place. But if we actually just show them really beautiful immersive photography and heavily curated content about what are the key neighborhood hotspots in this place, then they feel informed and empowered, and they trust us. So I think
I think we think about it very differently, and I think one of the key insights that we had about creating neighborhood communities was a real focus around privacy and making sure that people felt comfortable about sharing information with people, even though they live near each other, they don't know, and they're strangers. And so in order to join a Nextdoor community, you have to verify that you live in the community. You have to verify your address. And so when you do that, you're bringing on board not just a random handle, Lonely Girl 13. You're coming on board, my name's Sarah Leary, and I live on Vallejo Street in Pacific Heights. That tells you something about me, and it sets a norm in the community that is very, very important. This is my real name, my real identity, my real reputation. And as a result, we've been able to benefit from bringing the real social norms that exist already and have existed for centuries in the neighborhood to bring that online, to bring a higher quality of discussion. We don't get a lot of people who are saying nasty things on Nextdoor because your neighbors know where you live. They're going to see you. If you say something inappropriate, the likelihood that someone's going to come up to you and say, hey, Paul, why were you a jerk? Right? And you have the repercussions of that in the community. And so we think about taking the things that human beings really understand, which are the social norms of social interaction in the real world, and replicating them online. I think the problem is that people have gotten very busy with their lives, and they've moved away from literally walking down the street, knocking on the door, and delivering that plate of home-cooked cookies to welcome someone to the neighborhood. But the reality is that people want to make that connection. They just don't want to be rude and knock on someone's door uninvited. Nextdoor lowers the barrier, and we actually prompt users to introduce themselves to their neighbors. And guess what happens? Hi, my name's Sarah. I've just moved to San Francisco. I'm originally from New England, and I love the Boston Bruins. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 14 other people are saying, hey, so do I, and let's get together and watch the game tonight, for example. But more importantly, what happens is people get together and start even talking about how do we keep our community safe. And that context around the local community is really important and sets a lot of the norms that are hard to just create out of thin air online.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of kind of what Anne and Sarah were both just talking about, you know, you were asking, do people really have trouble meeting people? Are we too online or whatever? I think the problem really is summarized with all of these discovery products is lots of data, little time. Right? Like you were saying, people are busier and busier every day. We're filling up our time with tweets and TV, and everyone here is reading like 4 articles while this whole discussion is happening. And yet we still want the same high quality of interactions, of memories, of products, and we want all of that stuff to not remain, to never go compromised. And so I think the duty of the startups and products that are in people's hands is to make sense of all that data and then curate really what ends up going out there, doing the verification so that you don't have to, I don't know if you remember, what was it, Yahoo Answers before Quora? It was all these blank faces, avatars, and every time you asked a question, there was a 70% chance you're going to get just like heckling back.
And you had no context.
Right.
Who is this person and what do they bring to the table in the discussion?
And a product like Quora introduces real identity to some extent, and you get these high quality answers all of a sudden. And so I think what we're trying to do is do the same thing. People aren't necessarily antisocial. I don't think people walk around thinking their life sucks or whatever, but I think when they want to travel, they want an even richer experience, but they have less time to make it happen. When they walk around the city, they want the same. And so that's kind of what we try to provide.
One really interesting thing, I think, is that a lot of these norms haven't been established yet because we've never been able to communicate in this way before. Like, I'll often walk down the street and I'll see someone who I recognize from Highlight, and I've never met them, but I've seen them on Highlight 25 times before, so I feel like I know them. And I'll say, your name is Ken. And the guy will say, hi, Paul. And it's this strange thing because we've never been able to do that before, right? I just met this gentleman here who I've seen on Highlight a bunch of times, never met him in person, but he came and introduced himself, and I kind of feel like I know him a bit. And he was telling me that he was just in Berlin, and he saw a guy on Highlight who lives in Seattle. They haven't talked to each other for 10 years. They were both in Berlin for 2 different conferences, and they happened to see each other, and they reconnected, and now they're friends again. And it's just a new thing, and it's going to take us some years to figure out, just like the web took us some years to figure out. But I think if you can do it the right way, it makes life dramatically better. You know, Sarah had the point about reducing friction. That's what it's all about. It lowers that barrier to connecting with people, and it makes people friendlier. They smile more. They talk more. They remember people's names. They remember where they met people, and I think it dramatically increases the amount of face-to-face interaction if you do it the right way.
And builds trust. I mean, a lot of what's going on here is that we're lowering the barriers to make it easier for people to interact and build what's called in the sociology social capital. And that ultimately leads to trust and higher bandwidth conversations. And I think all of us are trying to facilitate that and using technology as a way to build that platform such that people can build real lasting interactions and real communities that extend just beyond a one-off interaction online.
For Airbnb, I want to add one thing, that for Airbnb, we talk about trust a lot. It's really important, obviously, for us. And we have one moment which we call the moment of truth. And there's a moment of truth for hosts, and there's a moment of truth for guests. The moment of truth for guests is when they actually arrive on site at their listing and they meet the host where they're staying. And that moment is so interesting because it's actually right where the online world and the offline world meet. So here you go to our website and you read about the host and you read about the neighborhood and you look at all these pictures of the listing and you have this sense of expectations. And then when you arrive and there's this moment where the expectation must be matched. And when the expectation is matched, that is when the trust builds and the social norms begin to change, where you just see people's love for Airbnb skyrocket the minute they actually travel like a local and they have that experience. And that's why we call that the moment of truth. And from there, it just builds.
How important is it, because all of us are involved one way or another in most of our companies, I suspect, trying to create safe communities based on trust and reputation and curating content, so on and so forth, whatever line of business you might be in this online world. How important are the early adopters, the beta testers? I mean, I think the San Francisco Bay Area is one great beta testing community. You know, Airbnb, when I first profiled Airbnb, one of the founders told me, in New York, if we tried to test our service and we had 2 bad experiences, they said, go fuck yourself. In San Francisco, after the 11th experience, they said, you're really getting better. How important are those beta testers and early adopters in setting these cultural norms and standards that we're talking about?
They are the most important. And I think that that's probably true across the board. At Nextdoor, we are very explicit about this. When you start a neighborhood community, we designate the first person as the founding member. And they have 21 days to go out and get 9 other neighbors to sign up and verify their address to make the community permanent. Otherwise, we will pull back that neighborhood and give someone else a chance. And that is like a voting mechanism. And we do that because having a neighborhood community of one is not a community. And so we actually test our founding members and our leads, and we give them tools to get the word out. We'll send out over 200 postcards to help them get the neighborhood up and running. But this is all a voting mechanism to make sure that there's a real vibrant community, because if you don't have it at that point, it's going to be very hard to bring it in later on.
Yeah, it's totally retrofit, isn't it?
And I think, you know, we talked about setting expectations. It's setting expectations of your community on day one, that it'll be high quality, it'll be very real and authentic, is obviously super, super important. And I think especially when we're trying to establish new norms, explore the bounds of where online and offline meet, staying in a stranger's house, or, you know, talking to someone you haven't met before. I think it's really, really important when doing that to make sure that it's high quality, that you're telling the story and you're rooting it in sort of human stories, right, in human terms. And I think that's ultimately, you know, we've seen a lot of benefit on Sōsh with that, which is, you know, when we're telling you about things to do, we don't try to give you 83% matching scores and like way too much data. We just try to make sure that it feels like very human, that there's a beautiful photo you can make a decision on, and that it's something that's, you know, rooted in what's very human, so to say.
I think anytime a technology comes out that allows us to share in a way that we haven't been able to share before, you see this really natural pattern where most people have this knee-jerk reaction where they say, that's weird, that's creepy, I don't like that. And again, it's not because they've tried sharing in that way and decided that they don't like doing it. It's because it's never even been an option before, so it feels uncomfortable. And what you almost always find is this small group of people says, that is kind of crazy, but I'll give that a shot. And they try it out, and they realize that it's kind of fun and rewarding, and social norms get established, and social currencies emerge, and new use cases develop, and they start to tell their friends about it. And over time, more and more people decide that the social benefits of being part of this thing and sharing in this new way outweigh the costs of that additional privacy that they're giving up. And that happened with Twitter, it happened with Facebook, it happened with Foursquare, it happened with LinkedIn, and it happened with the web itself. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of these spaces right now, and that's a very natural pattern. So those early adopters are very, very important.
Happened with Prism, too. So we're now down to our last minute. And I want to ask you guys, what's coming? What's next in neighborhood social discovery?
I'll start, I guess. I mean, so we got a lot of work to do. I mean, we're just a tiny fraction of a % of what we ultimately want to build. We really think about about this, this particular product that we're building as a sixth sense that I think is on par with the other five senses, where you can see information about people around you and sense things about people nearby in ways that we can't even imagine today. And so I think we just want the product to get steadily better and better and better, and we've got a lot of years of work ahead of us.
I think just having the connection to your local community is going to become much more commonplace. We're used to it now in our social network, and so having that in our local network is just going to become the de facto standard moving forward.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'll add some. I mean, at Airbnb, we think about this ability to travel through the world, 192 countries, and feel at home anywhere. And I really like your concept of the sixth sense. We actually use that phrase internally as well, because there's this challenge for the traveler. They're going through the world, and they need to feel like a local everywhere. So how can we give them a lens through which they understand where they are? They always have a sense of orientation. And so we have a lot of work to do ahead at Airbnb as well, building out additional content and services across frame by frame the entire guest experience at Airbnb so that people feel at home everywhere in the world.
And I think just talking about what's next for Sōsh and for Discovery as a whole is moving into the realm of proactiveness, and I think that's where things start to get very expensive, so to speak, for a company to start pushing you push notifications and emails and things like that. But and so when you're wrong, it really hurts. But when you're right, it's very delightful. And I think there's two ways to think about Discovery. One is beautiful and browsable, and that's like the mall, right? And that's like Pinterest, which is like people will scroll forever and ever, but it looks good and it's nice. And the other is smart and proactive, which is more like a concierge. And so I think finding some place between the mall and a concierge for Discovery is going to be an interesting experiment.
Great. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank each of our panelists for fabulous participation. And to those of you that live in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm willing to do this 10 more times till I get it right. Thank you all very much.